Good morning. My name's Dave Zwang, and I'm here to discuss collaboration as basically the future of commercial print and packaging, also known as Industry 4.0. So first, let me tell you a little bit about myself. Again, my name is Dave Zwang. Well, I wear a lot of hats. I'm a consultant. I travel around the globe. Normally, of course, during these strange times, I don't travel very much at all, and it's one of the reasons I'm not there in person. But my specialty is process and business analysis and automation. I do a lot of strategic development, process engineering, and primarily in the fields of print, packaging, and publishing. And I work with a lot of manufacturers as well as service providers, converters, etc. I also happen to be the chairman of the Ghent Workgroup, located in Belgium, but we're a global organization. And if you don't know much about us, you should at gwg.org. So when we start talking about collaboration and the future of the industry, I think one of the things we have to talk about are the trends, and we start there. So where are things going and why? If we were to look at the global growth for print production, you would see that in terms of all technology, this is all technologies, and this is actually a Smithers Pyra from a Smithers Pyra report. You can see that there's growth between, obviously there's a dip in 2020. We call that the pandemic dip or the COVID-19 dip if you want. But basically we were moving along, and then all of a sudden we had this dip, and now we've got to come back again. And we will come back again. And as you can see, and not only will we come back, but there'll also be some growth. But if we look at this in context, and I think that that's one of the things we need to do, because I think we need to understand that while this was a blip, if we look at it along a much longer stretch, starting in 2000, in this case to 2025, you can see what happened. And you can see that we had our recession in around 2008, or that was a global recession in 2008. We were growing. All of a sudden, we dropped down some. And while it was the subsequent drops or declines weren't that significant, they were still noticeable. And then, of course, we had 2020, where we had where we are today, and we're having this other dip. But one of the things that I think you need to look at is that there has been some step down in terms of the total volume of print, which means that there's going to be a lot of competition in the future. Now, that having been said, that doesn't mean that print is going away or print is dead. It just means that print is changing. Print is changing for a lot of different reasons. One of them is the industry is now becoming more integrated into the other industries that it serviced in the past, and we'll talk a little bit about that. But the other reason is that consumer behavior has changed, and as consumer behavior changes, it is going to affect print. So there are some transformational trends we should look at and we should talk about. First of all, as I said, consumer and distribution behavior are definitely changing. I mean, if you look at and think about things like packaging, and just shopping in general, online shopping is increasingly a significant portion of the market. Now, online shopping also in many cases means this hybrid, which is, they call it BOPIS, which is you kind of buy it online, then you go pick it up in a store. Big box stores, of course, are also a significant factor, and as well as sustainability. And I think that one of the things that we need to understand and be aware of is that while I say that online shopping is becoming is a trend, this is not a trend because of the pandemic, not because of COVID-19. COVID-19 will maybe help accelerate it a little bit. Won't accelerate necessarily today. I mean, I think that some of the other things need to catch up to be able to support that growth, but it was already well on its way towards becoming a significant influence. The other thing, if we look at the consumers, they're looking for more personal experiences. It's one of the reasons why things like mass customization, whether it's through marketing or packaging, mass customization is significant. And we're beginning to see the things that we talked about at one point as kind of the grail, the holy grail of communication, which is the one-to-one marketing and the one-to-one packaging, et cetera, for consumer goods. But personalization is just really starting to show itself, and a lot of that has to do with some of the buying behaviors of the millennials, as well as Gen Z. Of course, the other thing that, and we can't ignore this, is that there's been a lot of technology development. There's a tremendous amount of digitization in manufacturing processes as a whole and Industry 4.0. And that's really kind of what my premise is, which is that Industry 4.0, which really is the connecting or the more holistic look at all of these things put together, is really what's going to be driving and should be the focus for many people as they look toward the future. Obviously, e-business is very important, and you know why? Well, look, the cloud is becoming the new norm, right? It's not just a matter of getting our emails or listening, streaming music or streaming video. It's becoming the platform for doing business pretty much globally at this point. It's a new structure. And one of the beautiful things about the cloud is it really does facilitate business processes between the buyer and seller. However, the fact that it can facilitate those business processes is only part of the problem, or part of the solution, I should say, because we need to be able to coordinate those processes to be able to be supported by a lot of the new technology that's available through the cloud. Another thing that's happening in print and in the print industry is that there's a stratification and classification shift. There used to be a lot of very specialized, and on one hand, I'm a pad printer, or I am a label printer. And what we're starting to see now is that we're starting to see a shift, if you will, towards four main classifications of print production and print businesses. Obviously, we have commercial, which is kind of marketing, collateral, brochures, direct mail, transaction, etc. Packaging, labels, folding carton, corrugated, flexible packaging. Publications, magazine, catalogs, books, and of course industrial, which is really, industrial is interesting because industrial is really more towards the future of print. And we're throwing a lot of things into industrial now. It's kind of become a bucket until each of these things really begins to take off. But really what industrial is it's, remember before I mentioned that print is becoming part of the processes that it supported before. And that's really what's happening here. So for example, where it used to be that somebody would go to a print shop to get printing done, now in some cases, depending on what you're doing, if you're a manufacturer and you needed printed, whether they're labels or you needed boxes or whatever it is, or you needed something to be printed, it's now being printed on or as part of the process itself. And increasingly, we're beginning to see more and more of that, and expect to see more of that in the future as well. The other thing we're starting to see is that a lot of these different classifications are groups, but they're not. But we're starting to see this melding. So, for example, people who are doing labels are starting to migrate into doing things like flexible packaging, because there's a synergy there, synergy in terms of the business, the customer, and actually even the technology itself. But there is one thing that I think is very important, and that is kind of the differentiator. And again, if we're not talking about this industrial print where we are looking at printing as part of a manufacturing process, but we're looking more at the printing as a business, there's really two main categories of printing business. One is, I classify it as printing products. And those are predefined products, constrained design products, the kinds of things you would normally go online and select from a catalog and maybe change some things or upload some artwork and actually get the printed product that you're looking for. And that's a very competitive field. That's, web to print. That's where people start shopping and looking to see where they can get it the cheapest and how they can get things done. On the other hand, there's something that I call printing services, which is really more ad hoc, and that's really more customized. Variable production techniques. A lot of the sign and display work really tends to fall into this, where I need a banner, but it needs to fit on that building, and that building is huge, and then I need you to mount it on that building, and it has to represent certain things, etc. I want electronics in it. And those printing services actually have higher margins because there's a lot of value add to those types of services. So I look at it as a products and a services play, as really the two shifts, or if you will, the two different views of the printing industry. So how do you go ahead and kind of make the most of these changes and these trends and become competitive as we move forward? Well, ideally, you need to retool, and that's for sure. But you really also need to reinvent, because, as I said before, printing is increasingly becoming part of manufacturing and marketing. So, in terms of retooling, well, the hardware manufacturers, are beginning to make it easy for you. So, if I look at some of the analog technology. In this case, we're looking at offset presses. And if I look at these offset presses, all of the offset presses at one level, other than looking a little sleeker than they used to look, there's a significant inherent difference, and that is that they are very automated. Digitization has become a big part of how these things work, for a number of reasons. First of all, so that they could communicate within the operating system itself, the press's operating system, but also so it can better integrate with the other parts of the process that actually feed it and that it feeds. So you're looking at control systems and automatic plate changing and but ultimately, one of the things that it does as well is it supports short runs. And that's a very strategically important thing for analog press manufacturers, whether they are offset press manufacturers or whether they are flexo press manufacturers, because they need to begin to compete with digital equipment and digital presses. And, if I look at digital, people automatically think, well, we need to start moving, everything's going to move to inkjet. Well, it will move to inkjet in time, and not necessarily completely, because if we look at the growth rates of toner, it's still very much growing, and toner still is the largest percentage of digital print production in the marketplace. We like to think that inkjet is, but it isn't, not yet. As I said, it will continue. There's more growth in inkjet because it's starting from a lower level. It's starting from ground zero, where toners have been around, toner presses have been around, electrophotographic presses have been around since the early to mid 90s. So they already have a place in the market, and they're getting more sophisticated. They're being built into more complete process systems. And inkjet will as well, because they're going to learn a lot from what happened with toner. But these kinds of things, again, allow the connection and the communication within itself, but also within the process, the greater process. And again, inkjet, of course, well, look, there's a lot of inkjet out there now. There are a lot of people making inkjet heads. And this is inkjet is actually one of the things that is really creating that next level that I talked about before. It's what facilitates taking print and including it and integrating it into a manufacturing process. You can't very easily take a toner or an offset or even a flexo print process and put it in a manufacturing line, but you can with an inkjet head. and inkjet heads are growing. The use is growing, and the applications for that are growing as well, and that's significant. One of the things that inkjet is doing is it's adding new life and new functionality to analog technology as well. So we have hybrid solutions. We have solutions that actually combine analog technology like Flexo with and offset for that matter with inkjet technology. So you kind of get the best of both worlds. You get higher productivity because Flexo can run at up to 1,000 feet per minute, where inkjet on a good day, maybe we can get it up to 300, 400 feet a minute. But meters per minute. But 1,000 meters per minute is significant. So you're still going to have if you're looking for high volumes, you're still going to wind up picking those up in some of the analog technology. But the advantage of using the digital technology is that mass customization we talked about, the ability to take and do one-to-one marketing, et cetera, or one-to-one packaging. So all of these things actually start to put together and create these hybrid solutions. But these are actually, interestingly enough, the hybrid solutions are only the next step toward the ultimate, which is really the bespoke solution. So this is really, so if I were to look at, here's two solutions here. Remember I told you print is becoming part of the manufacturing process. So here, instead of going to a printing company, I can actually, for under $3 million US, I can actually build a pouch factory. I can have the printing, I can have the laminating, I can have the pouch building itself, and actually fill it, and then just fill it with in line with my product. HP is really was one of the initial leaders on this, and Zycon is coming up hard and strong. Both of these two players were amongst the original toner digital toner production machines going back to '93 at IPEX. Of course, Indigo was a separate organization and Zycon was, but basically, so these guys have been in it for a while. They know it, they understand it, and they understand and are constantly thinking about where these things need to go in the future. But if I look at hybrid and bespoke types of technology, it's not just for presses itself. We're starting to see the same thing with embellishment technologies as well. ABG has this thing they call the Digicon 3, which actually was originally designed as an embellishment tool for foil stamping and embossing, but they've added other things to it. So they can add print to it as well. So you're starting to see this melding, if you will, of a lot of these different applications and technologies together toward that end that I talked about. Basically creating a system, a solution that is targeted at a very specific product. And again, if we go back to what I was talking about early on with the printed product versus the printed service, if I'm going to be creating a printed product, I need to do it in the most optimized, cost-effective way. And if I'm building a solution to produce that product, it's probably going to give me a leg up if I can produce it and build that solution to optimize that product production. So again, under $3 million, very impressive. So we talk about collaboration. So, and I mentioned before, collaboration is really a number of things. It's not just collaboration externally, it's also collaboration internally, and it's important. That's really what Industry 4.0 is about. This is a map that was based on another map. I had actually many years ago, I did a study for Siebold, and for those of you who have gray hair, you may remember Siebold. For those of you who don't, trust me, they were the leaders in print and publishing technology, journalism, for many, many years, going back into the actually to the late 70s. And back then, I developed a workflow model that actually began to show this layering of processes and connection of processes. And we updated this in 2011 as a part of a study I did in conjunction with InfoTrends and Madison Advisors. And what we did is we took a look at the actual process itself, but not just the process as a standalone, but as a holistic view. And not just as a holistic view for a print service provider, but also for how they interact with their customers and their partners and suppliers. You know, if you look at each of these horizontal lines, you can see that, yeah, production is fairly straightforward. That's the where it actually happens. And production management or process management, well, that controls the production. And then the business information management, well, that's really the interface, if you will, between the business and the process and production. And then, of course, the external interface. And what's interesting is that you'll notice that there are actually arrows connecting each of these, including to the external. And that's important because your customers or the customers and or the suppliers have a similar requirement and a similar system and process view in their facility as well. So all of these things start to work together and start to communicate together. And that really is what Industry 4.0 is. I used to call it holistic. Oh, that's only because I'm an old hippie. But basically, that's really what we're talking about today. Bobst, who is really the leader in packaging equipment, actually started to build their own system. They call it Bobst Connect. They just introduced it this year, where they're actually connecting and building into each of their different types of equipment a connection to communicate not just and share information, not just with the machine itself, but with other machines and with customers and with retailers and suppliers, etc. So all of these things, as you can see, are really where the collaboration start to play and pay off in the long term. We're dealing with disparate systems. You know, it's not, in the old days, everybody had one manufacturer, that was where they worked with, and they connected that. If they had to bring in another type of something from another manufacturer, they connected it. But now everything is disparate. Every piece of equipment is a different manufacturer. Every system is a different system. So we have to be able to communicate and connect these things together. And that's where, automation, pipeline automation plays a significant role. And rules-based pipeline automation is really where it's all leading, and we used to have predefined, hot folders and linear, which is also based on hot folders. But rules-based automation is really where we're actually taking rules and we're building rules based on specific requirements or file requirements, and putting them together and making decisions, or having the workflow make decisions rather than the people make decisions. I call it agnostic modularity. And if we're looking at agnostic modularity and we look at it, this is actually taken right out of one of my customers' solutions. And they have an MIS system, and they have automated imposition, and they have equipment from Heidelberg and Canon and Fujifilm, because they make plates. And we tied it all together with in this case for something in Focus Switch, which is a rules-based pipeline automation system. And basically, through the use of XML, we're able to communicate the attributes of the process and of the files that are actually going, and bidirectionally, by the way, as well, so that we can actually go back and through that business line that we looked at before, where we have our control and then we have our business systems, we can actually get that complete holistic view of the process itself. So what are the most important concepts? Well, first of all, obviously a manufacturing mentality is very important. And whether that is as a printer or as print as part of a manufacturing process itself. Process automation is key, because the ability to do collaboration doesn't really happen without process automation. Obviously, we've been collaborating without automation for years, but that basically means we're talking to each other. We're picking up a phone. We're sending a fax for those of us who remember what faxes were. Or emails, etc. But ultimately, if we want to deal with the future and the competitive nature of the future, it really is about communicating data. That's really what it is. It's about communicating and collaborating with the data of the processes. That's the key. And you know what? It's interesting when I go and I do a lot of engineering, go into a plant or work with, as I said, work with manufacturers. And one of the first things I tell them, because they say, you know, well, this is what I want to do, and I want to create this process. And I said, look, you know, technology is easy and people are hard. And that's very, very important. Basically, if you say it in maybe a little more politically correct, adoption is a function of adaptation. If you can't adapt, you'll never be able to adopt. And that becomes the real key to moving forward. Eventually, you're going to have to move in this direction, or people are going to have to move in this direction. If they don't, well, then they'll probably fall by the wayside with the company itself. But it is all something that's absolutely very doable and very exciting for those who go in and take on the process. So with that, thank you very much for listening. I really appreciate it. I appreciate the time and being invited. As I said, I'm not there to answer questions, but here's all the necessary information you need to communicate. Should you want to ask me questions, I'd be happy to answer them. And with that, thank you very much and enjoy the rest of the conference.